The Carpathian Mountains stood like blackened teeth against the bruised twilight sky, their peaks swallowed by clouds that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. Below, nestled in a valley where the mist gathered like the breath of forgotten dead, lay the village of Varkolac, a collection of timber houses with crosses carved above every doorway, a desperate plea for protection that had long since ceased to offer comfort. Mara knelt in the small cemetery behind the stone church, her worn fingers pressed against her grandmother's grave. The earth was still fresh, dark, and damp from the recent burial. 3 days had passed since the old woman had closed her eyes for the final time, whispering prayers that even death itself seemed to respect. The autumn wind carried the scent of dying leaves and something else, something that made the villagers bolt their doors before sunset and hang garlic from every window. "Grandmother," Mara whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling of the ancient yew trees that surrounded the graveyard. "They say the castle stirs again. They say he walks once more." She did not need to speak his name. In Varkolac, there was only one he that mattered, Count Dracula, the immortal lord whose shadow had hung over these lands for longer than any living soul could remember. Her grandmother had told her stories, not the foolish tales meant to frighten children, but the true accounts passed down through generations of women who had survived when others had not. Stories of beautiful maidens who disappeared into the night, of men found drained of blood, their faces frozen in expressions of ecstasy and terror, of a nobleman who had once been human, who had loved and lost, and who had made a bargain with darkness itself rather than accept the finality of death. "How you must have faith, child," her grandmother had said in those final hours, her papery hand clutching Mara's with surprising strength. "Faith is a light that even the oldest darkness cannot fully extinguish. Remember that. When the shadows come for you, and they will come, do not meet them with fear. Meet them with love." At the time, Mara had thought it was the fever speaking, the delirium of a dying mind. Now kneeling in the gathering darkness, she wondered if her grandmother had seen something in those final moments, something that was yet to come. The church bell tolled, a single mournful note that seemed to hang in the air long after it should have faded. Father Vasile emerged from the side door of the church, his black cassock swaying as he hurried toward her. His face, usually composed in the stern serenity expected of a priest, was pale and drawn. "Mara," he said, his voice urgent, "you must come inside now, the sun is nearly gone." She rose slowly, brushing the dirt from her simple homespun dress. "I was only praying, Father." Prayers can be said within stone walls as well as without. His eyes darted to the tree line beyond the cemetery, where the forest grew thick and impenetrable. "There are riders on the old mountain road, black horses with red eyes. The shepherd boy saw them an hour ago and ran here half mad with fright." Mara's heart quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "Then they are men, and men can be reasoned with." Father Vasile's laugh was bitter and short. "Would that they were men, child. Would that they were." He gripped her arm, not roughly, but with the urgency of genuine fear. "Come, please." They had nearly reached the church door when the sound reached them. Hoofbeats. Not the ordinary rhythm of horses ridden by travelers, but something synchronized and unnatural, as if the animals moved with a single shared consciousness. The sound echoed off the mountains, making it impossible to tell from which direction it came, yet seeming to come from everywhere at once. Father Vasile froze. His fingers tightened on Mara's arm until it hurt. "Too late," he breathed. "God forgive us. We are too late." The riders emerged from the mist like phantoms taking form. 6 of them, mounted on stallions as black as pitch, their eyes indeed glowing with an inner crimson light that had nothing to do with reflected sunset. The riders themselves wore dark cloaks that seemed to absorb what little light remained in the sky. Their faces were pale, too pale, and inhumanly beautiful in the way that poisonous flowers are beautiful. But it was the 7th rider that drew every eye, that seemed to pull the very air toward him as if reality itself bent in his presence. Count Dracula. He sat astride a magnificent black destrier, his posture regal despite the casual way he held the reins. His clothing was from another era, a long black coat with silver fastenings, a crimson cravat at his throat, and boots that gleamed despite the muddy road. His face was aristocratic and severe, with high cheekbones, and a mouth that suggested both cruelty and, strangely, sorrow. His hair was dark and swept back from his forehead, touching the collar of his coat. But it was his eyes that held Mara transfixed, dark as midnight, yet somehow burning with an intensity that spoke of centuries of hunger, of loss, of a terrible loneliness that no amount of time could diminish. He looked directly at her, only at her, as if Father Vasile, the church, the entire village did not exist, as if in all the world there was only Mara, kneeling in the dirt beside her grandmother's grave, and himself. "Release her, priest," Dracula said. His voice was deep and cultured, with an accent that belonged to courts long since turned to dust. It was not loud, yet it carried with perfect clarity, and there was in it a quality of command that had been obeyed for lifetimes beyond counting. Father Vasile's hand fell away from Mara's arm as if burned. He stepped back, his face a mask of anguish and shame. "My lord, please. She is innocent. She has done nothing to draw your attention." "Innocence," Dracula repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it strange. How rare that quality has become. How intriguing. He swung down from his horse with fluid grace, his boots making no sound as they touched the ground. He moved toward Mara with measured steps, each one deliberate, each one bringing him closer to the consecrated ground of the cemetery. Mara found her voice, though it trembled. "You cannot cross onto holy ground." One corner of his mouth lifted in something that might have been a smile, though there was no warmth in it. "I am already standing upon it, child. Did your grandmother not teach you that faith is not in the earth, but in the heart that walks upon it? This ground has been consecrated, yes, but by whom? A priest who even now considers fleeing? A congregation that offers prayers with one breath and curses with the next?" He stopped at the very edge of her grandmother's grave, looking down at the fresh earth. "Your grandmother, however, now there was faith. I could feel it from the castle, a small light that never wavered, not even in her final moments. It troubled me." "Then why have you come?" Mara demanded, and she was surprised by the steadiness that had entered her voice. Fear still coursed through her veins, but beneath it was something else. Anger, perhaps, or defiance. "If her faith troubled you so much, why disturb her rest? Why come here?" Dracula's eyes met hers again, and in them she saw something that shocked her more than his presence, more than his unholy beauty, more than the legends made flesh. She saw curiosity, and beneath that something even more unexpected, a flicker of pain so deep and ancient that it made her own grief seem like a moment's shadow. "I have not come to disturb the dead," he said quietly. "I have come for you." Behind her, Father Vasile made a sound of protest, but Dracula raised one hand, and the priest fell silent as if his very voice had been stolen. "There is to be a ceremony," Dracula continued, his gaze never leaving Mara's face. "At my castle, 3 nights hence. A ritual of great significance. My bride, my Elena, will be consecrated as Queen of the Night, and all the powers of darkness will gather to witness her ascension." He paused, and something complicated passed across his features. "I wish you to attend." The absurdity of the statement, the formal, almost courtly way he delivered it, would have made Mara laugh if terror had not closed her throat. "You wish me to attend a vampire ceremony? To witness the damnation of a soul?" "I wish you to witness what I have become," he corrected, and there was an urgency in his voice now, a need that seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. "I wish you to see the truth of this existence, so that you might understand what your grandmother's faith opposed, so that you might judge whether there is anything in this world or the next that can redeem what I am." "You cannot want redemption," Mara whispered. "You are the Prince of Darkness. You have murdered countless innocents. You have chosen damnation over salvation again and again." "Have I?" His voice was barely audible now, and she had to strain to hear it. "Or have I simply forgotten what salvation looks like? Your grandmother saw something in me once, long ago. She was a child then, and I spared her when I should not have. I do not know why, but as she lay dying, she spoke of me. She prayed for my soul." He turned his head slightly, looking at the crude wooden cross that marked the grave. "No one has prayed for me in 500 years. Mara's mind raced. This had to be a trick, some manipulation meant to confuse her, to make her lower her guard, and yet the raw emotion in his voice seemed genuine. Could a creature of such evil truly feel regret? Could something that had rejected God so completely still long for grace? "And if I refuse to come?" she asked. Dracula's expression hardened, the vulnerability vanishing behind a mask of cold authority. "You misunderstand. I am not asking, child. You will come to Castle Dracula. You will witness the ceremony, and you will stand beside me as the mortal soul that perhaps, just perhaps, remembers what it means to possess one." He gestured, and 2 of his riders dismounted, moving toward her with inhuman speed. Father Vasile found his voice at last. "No, In God's name I command you to— Your God, Dracula interrupted, his tone cutting like a blade, does not command here, priest. Not in this valley, not under this sky. He has abandoned these lands to me, just as he has abandoned me to darkness. Your prayers are wind against stone. The vampire riders seized Mara by the arms. Their hands were cold, so cold that even through the fabric of her dress she felt it, a chill that reached down to her bones. She struggled, but their strength was absolute, and her resistance meant nothing. Please, Father Vasile begged, and tears streamed down his weathered face. Please, she is all the village has left. Her kindness, her faith, will be returned to you, Dracula said, and there was something almost gentle in his tone now. 3 nights, priest. After the ceremony, she will be free to return. You have my word. He mounted his horse in a single smooth motion, for whatever a monster's word may be worth to you. Mara was lifted onto one of the black horses, placed before one of the vampire riders, whose arms circled her like iron bands. She could feel no heartbeat from the creature that held her, no warmth, no breath, only the terrible strength and the scent of earth and blood and something indefinably ancient. As the riders turned their horses toward the mountain road, Mara caught one last glimpse of Father Vasile, standing alone before the church with his hands clasped in desperate prayer. Then the horses began to move, not at a gallop but at a pace that seemed to devour distance, the landscape blurring around them as if they rode not through space, but through some fold in reality itself. The last light of day died behind the mountains, and darkness fell across Transylvania like a shroud. Mara closed her eyes and thought of her grandmother's final words. Faith is a light that even the oldest darkness cannot fully extinguish. She had no weapon, no power, no hope of escape, but she had faith, and she had love, and perhaps, just perhaps, that would be enough. The wind carried the howling of wolves as Castle Dracula appeared on the horizon, its towers reaching toward the stars like the grasping fingers of the damned. And in that moment, Mara understood that her grandmother's prayers had been answered, though not in any way she could have imagined. She was being brought into the very heart of darkness, not to be destroyed, but to be a witness. And perhaps, though she did not yet know it, to be the salvation that even the damned might seek. The journey to Castle Dracula seemed to exist outside of time itself. Mara could not tell if they had ridden for hours or mere minutes. The landscape rushed past in a blur of shadow and moonlight, the black horses moving with a speed that defied nature. The creature that held her, she could not bring herself to think of it as a man, maintained its iron grip, and she could feel the unnatural cold radiating from its body, like frost spreading across glass. They ascended through winding mountain paths where no living horse could have kept its footing, across bridges that spanned bottomless gorges, through forests where the trees grew so close that their branches formed a canopy that blocked out even the stars. And always ahead of them rode Count Dracula on his magnificent destrier, his dark silhouette a constant presence against the lesser darkness of the night. Finally, they emerged onto a promontory of bare rock, and there before them rose Castle Dracula. Mara had seen it from the village, of course. Everyone in the valley had. It was impossible not to see it, perched on its mountain peak, like a crown of thorns upon the head of the world. But from this distance, its true magnitude became apparent. The castle was vast, a sprawling fortress of black stone and Gothic spires that seemed to have grown from the mountain itself rather than been built upon it. Towers reached toward the sky like accusing fingers, their windows dark save for the occasional flicker of cold, blue light. Gargoyles crouched along the battlements, their stone faces twisted in expressions of eternal agony or perhaps eternal hunger. The main gate stood open, a massive arch flanked by statues of wolves with their heads thrown back in silent howls. As they passed beneath it, Mara felt a change in the air, as if they had crossed some invisible threshold between the world of the living and a realm where death held dominion. The courtyard they entered was paved with stones that had been worn smooth by centuries of footfalls. Torches burned in iron sconces along the walls, but their flames were strange, blue and white rather than orange and red, casting an ethereal glow that created more shadows than it dispelled. At the center of the courtyard stood a fountain, but instead of water, a dark liquid flowed from the mouth of a stone dragon, pooling in a basin below. Even from a distance, Mara could smell the metallic tang of blood. The riders dismounted in perfect unison, and Mara was lifted down as if she weighed nothing. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground. Whether from fear or from the unnatural speed of their journey, she could not say. She steadied herself, refusing to show weakness before these creatures of darkness. Count Dracula approached her, having dismounted with that same fluid grace. Up close, in the strange torchlight, she could see details she had missed in the cemetery. His face, while inhumanly beautiful, bore the subtle marks of sorrow, lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of centuries of grief, a tightness to his mouth that suggested words forever left unspoken. He was tall, perhaps a head taller than the tallest man in her village, and he moved with the confidence of one who had never known defeat. "Welcome to my home," he said, and there was a dark irony in his tone, "though I suspect you do not feel particularly welcomed." "I am your prisoner," Mara replied, meeting his gaze despite the fear that urged her to look away. "There is no welcome in captivity." Something flickered in his dark eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. "You have courage. That is good. You will need it in the hours to come." He gestured toward the castle's main entrance, where enormous wooden doors stood open, revealing a corridor beyond that seemed to stretch into infinity. "Come. There are preparations to be made, and Elena is eager to meet you." The way he said his bride's name, with a mixture of resignation and something that might have been dread, sent a chill down Mara's spine. She walked beside him, flanked by two of the vampire riders, through the great doors and into the castle proper. The interior was a study in Gothic grandeur and decay. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, supported by columns carved with scenes of battles and hunts, of feasts and executions. Tapestries hung from the walls, their colors faded by time, but their images still clear. Lords and ladies in medieval dress, dragons coiling around towers, angels falling from heaven with their wings aflame. Candelabras holding dozens of black candles provided illumination, their flames dancing in draughts that seemed to come from nowhere. They passed through a great hall where a table long enough to seat 100 guests stood empty, its surface covered in dust. They climbed a sweeping staircase, whose balustrade was carved with roses and thorns intertwined. They walked through galleries where paintings hung in gilded frames, portraits of nobles from ages past, their eyes seeming to follow Mara as she passed, their expressions ranging from pride to sorrow to naked terror. And everywhere, there was the sense of age, of time having stopped within these walls while the world outside moved on, of a place where the past was not memory but present reality, where history lived and breathed and hungered. Finally, they reached a corridor lined with doors of dark wood. Dracula stopped before one of these and turned to face Mara. "These will be your chambers," he said. "They have not been occupied in some time, but I believe you will find them comfortable enough. You will not be locked in. I have no fear that you will attempt escape. Where would you go? The mountains are treacherous even in daylight, and at night—" He let the sentence trail off meaningfully. "My servants will bring you water for washing and a change of clothing appropriate for the ceremony. You should rest. Tomorrow night, you will be presented to Elena, and I assure you, you will want all your strength for that encounter." He opened the door, revealing a bedchamber that might have belonged to a princess in a fairy tale, or a prisoner in a very comfortable cell. A 4-poster bed dominated the room, its canopy made of burgundy velvet. A wardrobe stood against one wall, and a vanity with a silver mirror against another. Thick carpets covered the stone floor, and a fireplace held logs ready to be lit, though Mara suspected that fires in this castle would provide little warmth. "Why am I here?" Mara asked suddenly, the question bursting from her before she could stop it. "Truly, why? You say you want me to witness the ceremony, but that cannot be the whole truth. You could have taken anyone from the village. Why me?" Dracula was silent for a long moment, his back to her as he stood in the doorway. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet she had to strain to hear it. "Because you were praying at your grandmother's grave. Because you did not run when you saw me. Because when I looked into your eyes I saw something I have not seen in 5 centuries. He turned then, and the expression on his face was one of such profound loneliness that Mara's heart ached despite her fear. "I saw someone who still believes that even monsters might be capable of change. Your grandmother believed it. She prayed for me as she died, and I find myself curious to know if that faith has any foundation in reality, or if it is merely the final delusion of the dying." Before Mara could respond, he stepped back into the corridor. "Good night, Mara of Varkolak. I will send my servant Renfield with your needs. Do not fear him, he is harmless enough, though his mind has been touched by madness and devotion in equal measure." He paused. "And Mara, thank you for your honesty. It has been a very long time since anyone has spoken to me without either terror or reverence. It is refreshing. Then he was gone, moving down the corridor with that preternatural silence, leaving Mara alone in the chamber. She stood in the doorway for several minutes, her mind reeling. Then slowly she entered the room and closed the door behind her. There was indeed no lock, or rather there was a lock, but it was on the outside, not the inside. She was free to move within the room, but she was still a prisoner. Mara walked to the window, pulling back the heavy curtains. The window looked out over the valley far below, where she could see the distant lights of her village, tiny as stars, so far away, so impossibly far. She sank down onto the edge of the bed, and only then did she allow herself to tremble. Only then did she permit the fear to wash over her in full force. She was in the castle of the damned, surrounded by creatures that fed on human blood, awaiting a ceremony that would consecrate evil itself. And she was here at the whim of a vampire lord who seemed to be seeking something from her that she did not understand and was not sure she could provide. A soft knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss," came a tremulous voice from the other side. "Miss, I have water and garments, as the master commanded. May I enter? Please say I may enter, as the master will be most displeased if I fail in my duty. And when the master is displeased, oh, the consequences are terrible, terrible indeed." Mara stood and opened the door. The man who stood there was thin to the point of emaciation, with wild grey hair and eyes that darted constantly, never quite focusing on anything for more than a moment. He wore the remnants of what might once have been fine livery, but was now stained and tattered. In his trembling hands he carried a brass basin filled with water, and over one arm was draped a dress of deep blue silk. "Renfield?" Mara asked gently. The man's eyes snapped to her face, widened, and then immediately looked away. "Yes, yes, Renfield, that is my name, given to me by the Master who is merciful in his way, though his mercy is not like the mercy of God. No, not at all like that, but still a mercy, a dark mercy, a mercy that comes with teeth and—" He stopped himself, swallowing hard. "I have brought what you need, miss. May I set them down? May I perform my duty?" "Of course," Mara said, stepping aside. "Please come in." Renfield scurried into the room, set the basin on the vanity, and draped the dress carefully over a chair. He then stood there, wringing his hands, his gaze darting around the room as if expecting monsters to emerge from every shadow, though in this place, Mara supposed, that was not an unreasonable expectation. "How long have you been here?" Mara asked, hoping conversation might calm the man's evident distress. "Long? How long? Time is different here, miss. Days blend into nights, and nights into days until one cannot tell which is which. I came seeking the Master's secrets, you see. I was a scholar once, oh yes, learned in many things, and I thought I could uncover the mystery of eternal life." A bitter laugh escaped him. "And I did, miss. I did. But the cost, the terrible cost." "You're trapped here," Mara said softly. It was not a question. "Trapped? No, no, not trapped. Bound. Bound by oath and blood and terrible knowledge. I serve the Master because I chose to serve him, because I thought that in serving him I might become like him, might taste immortality." His eyes finally met hers, and in them she saw a desperation that went beyond madness. "But he will not grant it, miss. He keeps me mortal, keeps me aging and dying by degrees, and I do not know if it is mercy or punishment. Some nights I think it is both." Mara felt a wave of pity for this broken man. "Is there no way to break free? No way to reclaim your soul?" Renfield's laugh was high and terrible. "My soul, miss. I bartered that away myself. The Master did not take it. I gave it freely. That is the horror of it. We always think we are making clever bargains with darkness, that we will somehow be the exception, the one who gains power without paying the price. But darkness keeps better accounts than we do." He moved toward the door, then paused, his hand on the frame. When he spoke again, his voice was different, clearer, more lucid, as if some fragment of his former self had risen to the surface. "Miss, if you have faith, if you truly have faith as the Master says you do, then hold to it. Hold to it as a drowning man holds to driftwood. There are things happening here that even I do not fully understand. Wheels within wheels. And the ceremony," he shuddered, "the ceremony will be terrible and beautiful and wrong in ways that will shake the foundations of your beliefs. But if you can hold to faith, if you can remember what it means to love rather than to hunger, then perhaps something might change." Before Mara could ask what he meant, Renfield had slipped out of the room, pulling the door closed behind him. She heard his footsteps receding down the corridor, heard his voice muttering to itself, the words lost in distance and echo. Mara turned to the basin of water. It was clean and clear, and when she dipped her fingers into it, she found it surprisingly warm. She washed her face and hands, the simple act grounding her, reminding her that she was still herself, still human, despite the unreality of her surroundings. Then she turned her attention to the dress. It was beautiful, far more beautiful than anything she had ever worn. The silk was the color of deep twilight, and when she held it up to the candlelight, she saw that it was embroidered with silver thread in patterns of stars and crescent moons. It was a gown fit for nobility, not for a peasant girl from a forgotten village, but she understood the message in the gift. She was to be dressed appropriately for the ceremony. She was to look the part of the mortal witness to immortal darkness. Mara changed out of her simple homespun dress and into the silk gown. It fit perfectly, which should not have surprised her, but somehow did. Of course, Dracula would have known her exact measurements. Of course, he would have anticipated her every need. He had been observing the world, observing humanity for centuries. What was one peasant girl's size compared to that vast experience? She caught sight of herself in the silver mirror above the vanity and barely recognized the woman who stared back. The dress transformed her, made her look like someone from one of the old paintings hanging in the castle galleries. Someone noble and tragic and doomed. Exhaustion suddenly crashed over her like a wave. The terror, the journey, the sheer impossibility of everything that had happened, it all caught up with her at once. She had not slept since the night before, and her body demanded rest, even if her mind raced with fear and confusion. Mara lay down on the bed, intending only to close her eyes for a moment. But the moment stretched, and despite her circumstances, despite the horror that surrounded her, sleep claimed her with surprising gentleness. She dreamed of her grandmother, whole and healthy once more, standing in a garden filled with flowers that Mara did not recognize. The old woman smiled and reached out her hand. "You are where you need to be, child," her grandmother said in the dream. "Do not be afraid. Even in the deepest darkness, God's light can find a way to shine. You are that light, Mara. You are the answer to my prayers." "I don't understand," Mara said. "What am I supposed to do?" "Love," her grandmother replied simply. "When faced with hatred, love. When faced with despair, hope. When faced with darkness, be light. It is all we can do, and it is everything. And it is—" Then the dream faded, and Mara slept deeply, unaware that far below in the crypt of the castle, Count Dracula stood before the sarcophagus of his bride Elena, his hand resting on the cold stone, his expression troubled. "She is here," he said to the silence, to the sleeping undead, to himself. "The mortal girl with faith in her heart, and I do not know if I have brought her here to destroy that faith or to be destroyed by it." No answer came, but in the depths of the sarcophagus something stirred, and in her sleep within stone, Elena, soon to be queen of the night, smiled with anticipation that was cruel and hungry and utterly devoid of mercy. Mara woke to the sound of music, a melody so beautiful and so melancholy that for a moment she thought she was still dreaming. It was a woman's voice, singing in a language she did not recognize, the notes rising and falling like the flight of a bird that had forgotten the way home. The voice carried with it a weight of sorrow that seemed to press down upon the very air, making it difficult to breathe. She sat up in the bed, disoriented. Pale moonlight streamed through the window. The moon, she realized, was in exactly the same position it had been when she fell asleep. Either no time had passed, or an entire day had passed and night had come again. In this place both seemed equally possible. The singing stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was somehow worse than the song had been. Mara rose from the bed and moved to the window. The valley below was swallowed in darkness, no lights visible from the village. Either they had extinguished every lamp and candle, or the distance was too great to see them. She felt the isolation like a physical weight. She was alone in the domain of monsters, cut off from everything familiar and safe. A knock at the door, firmer than Renfield's timid tapping from the night before, made her turn. "Enter," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. The door opened to reveal not Renfield but a woman, or rather something that had once been a woman. She was tall and slender, dressed in a gown of midnight blue velvet that might have been magnificent 2 centuries ago, but was now faded and worn. Her skin was pale as alabaster, her hair a cascade of silver blonde that fell to her waist. Her face would have been beautiful if not for the predatory quality in her features, the slightly too sharp angles, the eyes that held no warmth, only hunger barely contained. "So," the woman said, Her voice like honey poured over broken glass. "You are the little mortal that has captured my lord's attention." She glided into the room, there was no other word for the way she moved, and circled Mara like a wolf circling prey. "How ordinary you are. I had expected someone more remarkable, but then Dracula always did have peculiar tastes." "And you are?" Mara asked, though she suspected she already knew. The woman's smile revealed teeth that were just slightly too long, too sharp. "I am Elena, Countess Elena Dracula, soon to be Queen of the Night, Mistress of the Undead, and eternal bride to the Lord of Darkness. Though I suppose I have been his bride for quite some time already, 500 years, give or take a decade." She leaned in close, and Mara could smell her perfume, roses and earth and something metallic. "But immortality does appreciate ceremony, don't you think? One must mark the passage of centuries somehow, or they all blur together into meaninglessness." Mara stood her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to retreat. "You were human once." Elena's expression flickered. Something passed across her face too quickly to read, but it might have been pain. "Once, so very long ago that I barely remember what it felt like. To be warm, to feel my heart beat, to know that each sunrise brought me closer to death, and to treasure the time I had because of it." The moment of vulnerability vanished, replaced by cold amusement. "But that weakness is behind me now. I have transcended the limitations of mortality. I am eternal, unchanging, perfect." "You are dead," Mara said quietly. "There is no perfection in death." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Elena's eyes flashed with anger, and for a moment Mara saw the monster beneath the beautiful facade, saw the fangs fully extended, saw the hunger naked and terrible. But then Elena laughed, a sound like breaking crystal, and the moment passed. "Oh, you have spirit. I can see why he brought you here. Dracula has always been drawn to those who challenge him, who refuse to cower. It never ends well for them, of course, but it provides entertainment while it lasts." She moved to the wardrobe and opened it, revealing several other gowns hanging inside. "Tonight you will meet the court, the other ancient ones who serve my lord and who will attend the ceremony. You will need to look presentable. This blue suits you well enough, but for tonight—" She pulled out a gown of deep crimson. "This, the color of blood and roses. How appropriate." "I will not play dress-up for your entertainment," Mara said. Elena turned to her, and there was genuine curiosity in her expression now. "You truly do not fear me, do you? How extraordinary. Most mortals can barely stand to be in the same room with me. They feel it, the wrongness, the corruption of everything I am. It radiates from me like cold from ice, but you—" She tilted her head, studying Mara. "You see me? You know what I am, and yet you do not tremble. Why?" Mara considered the question. Why didn't she feel the terror she should? Why could she stand here, conversing with a creature that by all rights should fill her with horror? And then she understood. "Because I pity you," she said softly. The words hung in the air like a pronouncement of judgment. Elena went very still, her expression frozen somewhere between fury and shock. "You pity me." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You said you barely remember what it felt like to be warm, to feel your heart beat. You have lived for 5 centuries, and yet you cannot truly live. You exist, you endure, but you do not live. How can I fear something so sad? How can I tremble before something that has lost so much?" For a long moment, Elena simply stared at her. Then, with a sound that might have been a sob or might have been a snarl, she turned away, gripping the back of a chair so hard that the wood cracked beneath her fingers. "You know nothing," Elena hissed. "Nothing of what I have gained, what power I possess. I am beyond death, beyond time, beyond the pathetic fears and hopes that plague your kind. I am—" "Lonely," Mara interrupted. "You are lonely, and you have been lonely for so long that you have forgotten what it feels like to truly connect with another soul. That is why this ceremony matters to you so much, isn't it? You hope that by becoming Queen of the Night, by formalizing your position, you might finally feel less empty." Elena whirled to face her, and there were tears on her cheeks, tears of blood dark as wine that left crimson trails down her pale skin. "Stop," she whispered. "Please, just stop." But Mara could not stop, because in that moment she saw the truth of it, saw past the monster to the woman who had been lost centuries ago. He gave you immortality, but he could not give you love, not real love, because love requires vulnerability, requires the ability to be hurt, and he has armored himself against that possibility so thoroughly that he no longer knows how to truly feel. "And you think you can teach him?" Elena demanded, her voice breaking. "You think your mortal faith, your human compassion, can reach through 500 years of darkness and find whatever shred of humanity might still exist in him?" She laughed bitterly. "Hundreds have tried, little girl. Priests and holy men, warriors and scholars, even those who loved him before his transformation. All have failed. What makes you think you will be different?" "I don't know that I will be," Mara admitted, "but I have to try. Because if there is even the smallest possibility that a soul can be redeemed, then we are obligated to seek that redemption. To give up on anyone, even a monster, is to give up on the very principle of grace itself." Elena was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet that Mara had to strain to hear it. "I remember grace. I remember believing in it, praying for it. I was devout once, you know. I spent hours on my knees in the chapel of my father's castle, begging God to show me the path to salvation. And then Dracula came." Her eyes grew distant, lost in memory. "He was different then. Still vampire, still cursed, but not yet so utterly consumed by darkness. He courted me with poetry and promises. He told me he could give me forever. And I chose him over heaven. I chose the certainty of eternal darkness over the uncertain hope of divine light." "Do you regret it?" Mara asked. Elena's laugh was hollow. "Every moment of every endless night. But regret changes nothing. I am what I am, and I cannot go back. Even if I wanted to end my existence, I no longer have the courage. 500 years is a long time to grow accustomed to survival, even if that survival is damnation." She moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. "He brought you here because you remind him of what he lost, because your faith is a mirror that reflects his own emptiness back at him, and he cannot look away. He is hoping, I think, that you will either confirm his worst fears, that redemption is impossible and he is truly beyond salvation, or—" She trailed off. "Or," Mara prompted. Elena turned to face her, and the expression on her face was complex, jealousy and hope warring with resignation and despair. "Or that you will prove him wrong, that you will somehow reach the part of him that he thought died centuries ago. And if you do—" She paused, her voice catching. "If you do, then I will have been right all along, that he was capable of love all this time, but simply chose not to give it to me." The raw pain in those words broke Mara's heart. She crossed the room and, acting purely on instinct, reached out to take Elena's hand. The vampire flinched at the contact, started to pull away, but then stopped. She looked down at their joined hands, one warm and living, one cold and dead, as if seeing a symbol of something she could not quite name. "I cannot promise you anything," Mara said gently. "I don't know why I'm here or what I'm meant to do, but I can promise you this. I will not give up on either of you. Not on him and not on you." Elena's eyes widened. "On me? You would seek to redeem me as well?" "If a soul can be redeemed, then any soul can be redeemed," Mara replied. "That is what my grandmother taught me. That is what I choose to believe, even in the face of evidence that would suggest otherwise." For a moment something like hope flickered in Elena's undead eyes, but then she pulled her hand away, shaking her head. "You are a fool, a beautiful, naive fool, and this place will destroy you, just as it has destroyed everyone who ever tried to bring light into its darkness." She moved to the door, then paused, her back to Mara. "The court gathers at midnight. Renfield will come to fetch you. Wear the red dress. And, Mara," she glanced back over her shoulder, "thank you for your kindness. I had forgotten what it felt like to be spoken to as a person rather than a monster. It will make what comes next more difficult, but—" A sad smile touched her lips. Perhaps that is not entirely a bad thing. Then she was gone, leaving Mara alone with her thoughts and the red dress that hung in the wardrobe like a splash of blood against the darkness. Mara stood there for a long time, her mind racing. She had come here expecting to find pure evil, uncomplicated malevolence that could be opposed with faith and righteousness. But what she had found instead was something far more complicated. Broken souls clinging to existence, monsters who remembered being human, and a love corrupted by time and darkness into something toxic and painful. How did one redeem such brokenness? How did one bring light to a place where darkness had reigned for so long? She did not know, but she knew she had to try. Mara changed into the red dress, and as she fastened the last clasp, she caught sight of herself in the mirror again. The dress was stunning. It clung to her figure like a second skin, the neckline lower than anything she had ever worn, the fabric shimmering in the candlelight as if it were alive. She looked dangerous. She looked tempting. She looked like someone who belonged in this castle of the damned, but when she looked into her own eyes in the mirror, she saw that they remained unchanged. They were still her eyes, still filled with the faith and compassion that defined her. The dress might transform her appearance, but it could not touch her soul. That, at least, was something. A soft knock at the door announced Renfield's arrival. When Mara opened it, the servant's eyes widened at the sight of her, and he quickly looked away, as if the vision of her in that dress was too much for his fragile mind to bear. Miss, he stammered, the court awaits. The master, requests your presence in the great hall. All the ancient ones are gathered, and he swallowed hard. And they are hungry, miss, so very hungry. You must be careful. You must not show fear, for fear calls to them like blood calls to sharks. I understand, Mara said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Lead the way, Renfield. They descended through the castle, down corridors that seemed to twist and turn in ways that defied geometry, past chambers where shadows moved with purposes of their own. And with each step, Mara could hear it growing louder, a sound like whispered conversation, like the rustling of wings, like the breathing of something vast and terrible waiting in the darkness ahead. The court of the undead was assembled, and Mara was about to step into their midst. Whatever happened next would determine not just her own fate, but perhaps the fate of the very souls she had promised to save. She touched the small wooden cross that hung beneath her dress, hidden against her skin. It was warm, impossibly warm in this place of cold death, and in that warmth she found her courage. I am ready, she said, and Renfield, his face pale with terror and admiration, pushed open the doors to the great hall. The great hall was a cathedral of darkness and decadent beauty. Vaulted ceilings rose so high they disappeared into shadow, supported by columns carved to resemble twisted trees, whose branches intertwined overhead. Hundreds of candles burned in massive chandeliers, but their light seemed to be absorbed by the darkness rather than dispelling it, creating pools of illumination that only made the surrounding shadows deeper and more menacing. At the far end of the hall, upon a raised dais, sat 2 thrones of black wood and crimson velvet. The larger throne was occupied by Count Dracula, who sat with the casual authority of one who had ruled for centuries. He wore formal attire, a tailcoat of midnight black with a crimson vest, his dark hair swept back, his expression unreadable. But when his eyes found Mara entering the hall, something shifted in his gaze. Surprise, perhaps, or approval, or something more complicated that she could not name. The smaller throne beside him stood empty, waiting for Elena. But it was not the thrones or even Dracula himself that made Mara's breath catch in her throat. It was the others. The court of the undead filled the hall, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, though the shadows made it impossible to count with any accuracy. They stood or sat or reclined on benches along the walls, and every single one of them turned to look at Mara as she entered. Their eyes glowed in the darkness, red and gold and pale blue, like the eyes of wolves watching prey from the tree line. They were beautiful, all of them, with the terrible beauty of things that had been human and were human no longer. Men in clothing from every era of the past 5 centuries, medieval knights still wearing tattered surcoats, Renaissance nobles in doublets and hose, Georgian gentlemen in powdered wigs, Victorian lords in formal evening wear, women in gowns that ranged from medieval kirtles to elaborate ball gowns dripping with jewels, their hair styled in fashions long since passed from memory, and all of them were watching her with a hunger that was palpable, a collective desire that pressed against her like a physical force. She could feel their anticipation, their barely restrained need. She was warmth in a place of eternal cold, life in a realm of death, and they wanted her with an intensity that went beyond mere bloodlust into something almost spiritual in its desperation. Mara walked forward, each step requiring an act of will. Renfield had retreated immediately upon opening the doors, leaving her to cross the vast expanse of the hall alone. The red dress whispered against the stone floor, and she was acutely aware of how exposed she was, not just physically, though the dress revealed more of her skin than she was comfortable with, but spiritually. She was a single flame walking into an ocean of darkness, and she could feel that darkness pressing in from all sides, testing her, tasting her fear. But she would not run. She would not cower. Her grandmother had faced worse than this, and had survived through faith alone. Mara would do no less. As she approached the dais, the crowd of vampires parted before her like a sea of shadows. Some hissed as she passed, baring their fangs. Others reached out as if to touch her, then pulled back at the last moment, as if something about her burned them. One woman, dressed in the style of the Elizabethan court, whispered in a language Mara did not recognize, but the tone was clear enough, a mixture of desire and resentment. Finally, she reached the base of the dais and looked up at Dracula. He rose from his throne, a gesture of respect that seemed to shock the assembled court, and descended the steps to stand before her. Up close, she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were clasped behind his back, as if he did not trust what they might do otherwise. "You came," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that might have been relief. "Did you think I would refuse?" Mara asked. "I thought you might try to flee, or barricade yourself in the chamber, or fashion some weapon from the furniture and attempt to defend yourself." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Those have been common responses in the past, when mortals have found themselves in this hall." "I gave you no such promise," Mara replied, "but neither did I promise to behave as others have behaved. I am here because you asked me to witness something, so I will witness it." Dracula studied her for a long moment, and in his eyes she saw a complexity of emotion that belied his monstrous nature, curiosity and admiration, and something that looked almost like longing. "You are wearing the dress Elena chose for you. She has good taste even if her motives are complicated." That brought a genuine smile to his face, brief but real. "You spoke with her then, and you survived the encounter. That alone is remarkable. Elena is not known for her tolerance of rival mortals." He offered her his hand. "Come, sit beside me. You are to be my guest of honor tonight, and I will not have my court treat you as prey." Mara hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. His skin was cold, so cold, and there was no pulse beneath it, no warmth of life, but his grip was gentle, almost reverent, as he led her up the steps of the dais. A murmur ran through the assembled vampires, surprise and disapproval and speculation all mixed together. Mara could hear fragments of their whispers, speaking in a dozen different languages, but the tone was universal. She was mortal. She did not belong here. She was an insult to their nature, a reminder of what they had lost, and her presence among them was both fascinating and infuriating. Dracula guided her to Elena's throne. "Sit," he said. "Tonight you take the place that will soon be hers. Let them see that I honor the mortal soul as much as I honor the immortal darkness." Mara sat, the velvet of the throne soft beneath her. From this vantage point, she could see the entire court spread before her, a sea of beautiful, terrible faces all turned toward her, with expressions that ranged from hatred to hunger to reluctant respect. Dracula returned to his throne and raised one hand. Instantly the hall fell silent, every whisper dying away as if cut by a blade. "My children of the night," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the vast space. "Tonight we gather to honor the coming ceremony, the consecration of my bride, Elena, as Queen of the Night and Mistress of the Undead. For 5 centuries she has stood beside me, has ruled this court with grace and terror in equal measure. In 2 nights, she will ascend to a position of power that few have ever achieved, and our realm will be strengthened by her ascension." A ripple of approval moved through the crowd, though Mara noticed that not all the vampires seemed pleased by this announcement. Some exchanged glances that suggested resentment or ambition of their own. "But tonight," Dracula continued, "I have brought before you a mortal, a peasant girl from the village below, whose only claim to significance is that she possesses something we have all lost: faith, unshakable, inexplicable faith in goodness, in redemption, in the possibility that even darkness can be transformed by light." He turned to look at Mara, and his expression was inscrutable. "She is here as a witness. She will observe our ceremony, will see what we truly are, and she will judge whether we deserve the damnation we have chosen. And perhaps, just perhaps, she will teach us something we have forgotten in our endless nights." A voice rang out from the crowd, a man in armor that looked medieval, his face scarred and savage. "Why should we care what a mortal thinks of us? We are beyond their judgment, beyond their pathetic morality. We are gods compared to them, and this girl is nothing but food dressed in silk." Several other vampires murmured agreement, and Mara felt the atmosphere in the hall shift, becoming more dangerous, more predatory. But Dracula's expression hardened, and when he spoke, his voice carried a note of command that silenced all dissent. "You question my decisions, Andre. You who were a petty warlord before I granted you the dark gift? You who have spent 3 centuries learning control and still sometimes feed like an animal." He stood, and the sheer force of his presence seemed to fill the hall. "I am Count Dracula, I'm the first among us, the father of this bloodline, and what I decree is law. This mortal is under my protection. Anyone who harms her will answer to me personally, and I assure you my wrath is something none of you wish to experience." The vampire named André bowed his head, though the resentment in his posture was clear. "Forgive me, my lord. I meant no disrespect." "See that you remember that," Dracula said coldly. He turned his attention back to the assembled court. "Tonight, you will introduce yourselves to our guest. You will tell her your stories, how you came to this existence, what you were before, what you have become. Let her see the truth of what we are, without pretense or deception, and in return, she will offer no judgment, no condemnation. She will simply bear witness." He sat back down and gestured to the crowd. "Who will be first?" For a long moment, no one moved. Then, from the shadows near one of the great columns, a figure stepped forward. It was a woman, young in appearance, though her eyes spoke of centuries. She wore a dress of deep green velvet, and her red hair fell in waves to her waist. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "I am Katerina," she said. "I was turned in the year 1623 in Prague. I was 16 years old, newly married to a merchant I had never met, trapped in a life I did not choose." She looked directly at Mara. "Dracula offered me freedom, power, the ability to live on my own terms, rather than be property passed from father to husband. So I accepted the dark gift, and I have never regretted it." But even as she said the words, Mara saw the lie in her eyes, saw the shadow of regret that she was trying to hide. Another vampire stepped forward, a young man in Renaissance clothing, his face angelically beautiful. "I am Stefan. I was a painter in Florence, dying of plague, when the master found me. He preserved my life such as it is, and I have spent 400 years perfecting my art. I paint only at night, only in darkness, but my work has been seen by millions, though they do not know the creature who created it." There was pride in his voice, but also a deep sadness. "I have never held a brush in sunlight again. I have never seen my work the way it was meant to be seen." One by one they came forward. Each told their story. Each revealed the bargain they had made, trading mortality for immortality, weakness for power, the limitations of human life for the eternal hunger of the undead. And each, in their own way, revealed the cost of that bargain, the things they had lost, the people they had loved and watched die while they remained unchanged, the slow erosion of their humanity until they were no longer certain whether they were still themselves or merely wearing the skin of who they used to be. Mara listened to them all. She did not interrupt, did not judge, did not recoil even when they described feeding on innocence, killing without remorse, embracing the monster within. She simply listened, bearing witness as Dracula had asked, and in her silence there was a kind of acknowledgement, not approval but recognition. She saw them as they were, and she did not look away. Hours passed. The parade of stories continued until Mara lost count of how many had spoken. And through it all Dracula watched her, his expression unreadable but his attention never wavering. He was studying her, she realized, trying to understand how she could hear such horrors and not condemn, not hate, not break under the weight of so much accumulated darkness. Finally, when the last of the vampires had spoken, silence fell over the hall. Dracula rose from his throne and turned to Mara. "You have heard them," he said. "You have heard what we are, what we have done, what we have become. And now I ask you, what is your judgment? Are we beyond redemption? Are we truly damned? Or is there hope even for us?" Every vampire in the hall leaned forward, waiting for her answer. Even those who had scorned her presence now seemed hungry to hear what she would say, because in 500 years no one had asked this question with genuine sincerity. No one had cared whether redemption was possible. They had simply accepted their damnation and learned to glory in it. But Mara heard the real question beneath Dracula's words. He was not asking for the court, he was asking for himself. She stood, facing him across the throne, and when she spoke, her voice carried through the hall with surprising strength. "You ask me if you are beyond redemption," she said. "But that is the wrong question. The question is not whether you can be redeemed, but whether you wish to be. Redemption is not something granted from outside. It is something chosen from within. Every soul, no matter how dark, has the capacity for change. But that capacity means nothing if the will to change is absent." She turned to address the entire court. "I have heard your stories. I have heard your regrets and your pride, your losses and your gains. And what I hear beneath all of it is a terrible loneliness. You are immortal, but you are also isolated, cut off from the warmth of human connection, from the simple joys of mortal life, from the possibility of growth and change that comes from accepting death as a natural end. You have traded everything for eternity, and eternity has left you hollow. A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. Several vampires looked away, unable to meet her gaze. But here is the truth, Mara continued, her voice growing more passionate. Redemption is not earned by undoing the past. The past is fixed. What is done cannot be undone. Redemption is found in choosing from this moment forward to be something better than what you have been. It is found in acts of mercy, in moments of compassion, in the decision to resist the hunger rather than feed it. It is difficult. It is painful. It requires sacrificing the power you have come to rely on. But it is possible. She turned back to Dracula. So no, you are not beyond redemption. None of you are, but you must choose it. And that choice, I think, terrifies you more than any cross or holy water ever could. The silence that followed was absolute. For a long moment no one moved, no one breathed, though none of them needed to breathe. Then slowly Dracula began to smile. It was a sad smile, touched with irony and wonder. 500 years, he said softly. 500 years, and no one has ever said such things to me. They have cursed me, feared me, worshipped me, but no one has ever suggested that I might simply choose differently. He descended the steps once more and stood before her, so close that she could see flecks of color in his dark eyes, traces of the human he had once been, buried deep beneath centuries of darkness. You are either the bravest person I have ever met, he said, or the most foolish. Perhaps both. Perhaps, Mara agreed, but I spoke the truth as I see it. I know, Dracula said. That is what makes it so remarkable. He took her hand again, and this time his touch lingered, his cold fingers wrapped around her warm ones as if he were trying to remember what warmth felt like. The ceremony is tomorrow night, he said. Elena will be consecrated, and the old powers will be invoked. It will be beautiful and terrible, and when it is done, nothing will be the same. He paused. I want you to be there. Not because I wish to torment you or test your faith, but because I need someone to witness what I have become, and to remember that I asked, even if only for a moment, whether I might become something else. I will be there, Mara said quietly. I promised I would witness, and I keep my promises. Dracula released her hand and stepped back. Then, we are done here for tonight. The court is dismissed. Return to your coffins, to your crypts, to whatever darkness you call home. Tomorrow night we gather for the true ceremony. The vampires began to disperse, flowing out of the hall in a tide of shadows and whispers. Some looked at Mara with something approaching respect. Others still regarded her with hunger, but all of them had been touched in some small way by her words. As the hall emptied, Elena appeared at the far entrance. She had been watching, Mara realized. She had heard everything. The vampire bride walked slowly toward the dais, her expression complex and unreadable. You spoke well, Elena said when she reached them. Better than I expected. You made them uncomfortable, which is no small feat. She looked at Dracula. And you, my lord, did her words touch you as well? Dracula did not answer immediately. He looked at Mara, then at Elena, then out at the now empty hall. They reminded me, he said finally, of what it felt like to hope. I had forgotten that sensation. I am not certain I welcome its return. Eleanor's expression tightened, pain and jealousy warring with something that might have been relief. Then tomorrow's ceremony will be interesting indeed, because if you are beginning to hope, my lord, then the consecration may not go as planned. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the vast space, leaving Mara alone with Dracula on the dais. You should rest, he said. Tomorrow will be difficult for you, perhaps more difficult than you imagine. Will you hurt me? Mara asked directly. At the ceremony? No, Dracula said, and his voice was certain. I will not hurt you, but there are forces at work here that are beyond my control. The ceremony requires blood, requires sacrifice, requires the acknowledgement of darkness and the rejection of light. Your presence there may be painful for both of us. I can endure pain, Mara said. What I cannot endure is pretending that darkness is all there is. Dracula looked at her with an expression that was almost tender. You are remarkable, Mara of Varkolac. I wish I had met you 5 centuries ago, before I made my choice. Perhaps things would have been different. Perhaps, Mara said. Or perhaps I am here now precisely because you need to know that it is never too late to choose differently. She left him then, standing alone on the dais, and made her way back through the corridors to her chamber. Renfield was waiting outside her door, his face pale and anxious. "Miss, you survived. Oh, thank all the saints, you survived. I was so afraid that—" "I am well, Renfield," Mara assured him. "Frightened, but well." "Tomorrow," Renfield whispered, glancing around as if afraid the shadows might hear. "Tomorrow, the ceremony happens. And miss, I must warn you, there will be blood. There will be darkness such as you have never seen, and at the center of it all will be a choice that even I do not fully understand." He gripped her arm with surprising strength. "Hold to your faith, miss. Whatever you see, whatever happens, hold to your faith. It may be the only thing that saves any of us." Then he released her and scurried away down the corridor, leaving Mara alone with her thoughts and her fears and the knowledge that tomorrow night everything would come to a head. She entered her chamber and closed the door. The red dress felt heavy now, as if it had absorbed some of the darkness of the hall. She changed out of it and into the simple white nightgown that had been laid out on her bed. Laid out by whom she did not know, and was not certain she wanted to know. Mara knelt beside the bed and clasped her hands in prayer. The words came easily, as they always had, but tonight they felt different, more desperate, more necessary, more powerful. "Lord," she whispered, "I am in the darkest place I have ever known. I am surrounded by death and evil and souls that have forgotten your light. But I am not afraid, or rather, I am afraid. But I trust that you are with me even here, even in this castle of damnation. Show me what I must do. Show me how to be the light in this darkness. And if I am to be extinguished, then let my light burn bright enough to leave a mark on the darkness before it goes out." She remained there kneeling in prayer until exhaustion overtook her and she climbed into bed. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of Dracula's eyes, the way they had looked when she spoke of redemption, as if she had spoken a word he had thought existed only in dreams. Tomorrow would bring the ceremony. Tomorrow would bring darkness like she had never known. But tomorrow would also bring the culmination of everything she had been brought here to do. And somehow she knew that when it was over, nothing, not her, not Dracula, not even Elena, would be the same. The night of the ceremony arrived with a storm. Thunder rolled across the Carpathian mountains like the drums of war, and lightning split the sky with veins of white fire. Rain lashed against the castle walls, and the wind howled through the towers like the voices of the damned calling out from hell itself. It was as if nature itself was protesting what was about to occur within these ancient stones. Mara stood at her window, watching the tempest rage. She had not slept well. Her dreams had been troubled, filled with images of blood and crosses, of light struggling against overwhelming darkness. She had woken before sunset with the certainty that tonight would change everything, though she could not say how. A knock at the door. This time it was not Renfield but a vampire servant, a young woman whose name Mara had not learned, whose eyes held the hollow hunger common to all the undead. She carried a gown unlike anything Mara had yet seen. "For the ceremony," the servant said, her voice toneless. "The master insists you wear this." The gown was white, pure, spotless white, like fresh snow or communion cloth. It was simple in design, almost monastic, with long sleeves and a high neckline. But the fabric was extraordinary, silk so fine it seemed to shimmer with its own inner light, and embroidered throughout with silver thread in patterns of crosses and lilies. It was a gown for a bride, or perhaps for a sacrifice. Mara understood the symbolism immediately. At Elena's dark consecration, she would stand as the embodiment of everything the vampires had rejected: purity, faith, innocence, light. She would be the counterpoint to the darkness, the living reminder of what they had lost. "I will wear it," Mara said quietly. The servant helped her dress, her cold fingers surprisingly gentle. When it was done, Mara looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked ethereal, almost angelic, the white gown making her dark hair and eyes stand out in stark contrast. She looked like a saint from an old painting, or a martyr walking toward her fate with serene acceptance. The servant placed a final touch, a wreath of white roses for Mara's hair, though how such flowers bloomed in this place of death, Mara could not imagine. "You are ready," the servant said. Then, in a voice so low Mara almost missed it, she added, "Be brave, mortal. Some of us remember what it was to pray. Some of us remember what it was to hope. You remind us of that. Do not let the darkness take it from you." Before Mara could respond, the servant had fled the room, leaving her alone with her reflection and her fear. The door opened again. This time it was Dracula himself. He wore formal attire, a long coat of deepest black with silver buttons, a crimson vest beneath, and a high collar that gave him an air of aristocratic severity. His dark hair was swept back, and his pale face seemed carved from marble in the candlelight. But it was his eyes that caught Mara's attention. They burned with an intensity that was almost feverish, a mixture of anticipation and dread. "You look," he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "You look as if you have stepped out of a medieval manuscript, an illumination of a saint facing the lions in the arena." "Is that what I am doing?" Mara asked. "Facing lions?" "Perhaps," Dracula said. "Though I pray, you will not be devoured." He offered his arm. "Come. The court is assembled in the Chapel of Eternal Night. Elena awaits her consecration, and you will stand as witness to what we truly are." Mara took his arm, feeling the cold of him even through the fabric of his coat. Together they walked through the castle, descending ever deeper, past the levels she had seen before and into depths she had not known existed. The air grew colder, damper, and she could smell earth and stone and something else, something ancient and wrong that made her skin crawl. They reached a doorway carved with symbols that hurt to look at, inverted crosses, serpents devouring their own tails, words in languages that predated Latin. Beyond it, stone steps led down into darkness. "The Chapel of Eternal Night," Dracula said, "was old when I was born. It was a place of worship once, though to what gods I do not know. When I claimed this castle, I consecrated it anew, to darkness, to immortality, to the rejection of heaven's light. It is the heart of my domain, the center of my power, and it is where Elena will be crowned Queen of the Night." They descended. The stairs seemed to go on forever, spiraling down into the mountain itself. Torches lined the walls, their flames that unnatural blue-white that gave no warmth. And with each step, Mara felt the weight of the darkness pressing down upon her, testing her faith, seeking any crack in her armor of belief. But she did not waver. She thought of her grandmother, of Father Vasile praying in his small church, of all the simple people who had lived and died with nothing but their faith to sustain them. If they could hold to light in their darkest hours, then so could she. The stairs opened into a vast underground chamber. The Chapel of Eternal Night was enormous, a cathedral carved from living stone, its ceiling lost in shadow, its walls covered with ancient frescoes that depicted scenes of beauty and horror intertwined. At the far end stood an altar of black stone, and behind it, instead of a cross, hung an inverted pentagram made of what looked like bones. The entire vampire court had assembled here. They filled the chapel, standing in rows like a congregation, but their presence was a mockery of any holy gathering. They did not pray, they hungered. They did not worship, they celebrated their own damnation. And at the sight of Mara in her white gown, a collective hiss rose from them, as if her very presence burned them. Dracula led her to a place of honor near the altar, then took his position before it. Elena stood to one side, dressed now in a gown of black and crimson, her silver blonde hair unbound and flowing to her waist. She wore a crown of black iron, adorned with rubies that gleamed like drops of blood. She looked magnificent and terrible, a dark queen ready to claim her throne. But when her eyes met Mara's across the chapel, Mara saw something unexpected: fear. Elena was afraid, not of the ceremony itself, but of what it might reveal, of what choice might be demanded of her. Dracula raised his hands, and silence fell over the chapel like a shroud. "Children of darkness," he intoned, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "We gather tonight to witness a consecration 5 centuries in the making. Elena, who has stood beside me through ages of blood and shadow, will be elevated to Queen of the Night. She will be bound to the ancient powers, will be granted dominion over the undead, will rule at my side for all eternity." He paused, and Mara heard the hesitation in his voice. "This is what she has desired. This is what I have promised. And tonight, that promise will be fulfilled." He gestured to Elena, who moved to stand before the altar. 2 vampire priests, if such a thing could exist, emerged from the shadows, carrying a chalice of worked silver. Mara did not need to guess what it contained. The metallic scent of blood filled the chapel. "Elena," Dracula said, taking the chalice, "do you accept this consecration? Do you willingly bind yourself to eternal darkness, rejecting forever the light of heaven, embracing the power and isolation of immortal night?" Elena opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Mara's voice rang out across the chapel. "Stop!" Every head turned toward her. The vampire court erupted in hisses and growls. Several moved as if to attack, but Dracula raised his hand, freezing them in place. "Who you dare interrupt?" one of the vampire priests snarled. "You dare defile this sacred moment with your mortal voice." But Dracula was looking at Mara with an expression that was not anger, but curiosity. "Speak," he said. "You have not come this far to remain silent. What is it you wish to say?" Mara stepped forward, her white gown standing out like a beacon in the sea of darkness. She looked at Elena, then at Dracula, then at the assembled court. "You speak of this as if it is inevitable," she said, "as if Elena has no choice, as if this ceremony is simply the recognition of what already is. But that is a lie. Every moment presents a choice. Every breath, even those we no longer need to take, is an opportunity to choose differently than we have chosen before." She turned to Elena. "You stand here ready to be consecrated as Queen of the Night, to bind yourself eternally to darkness. But I ask you, is this truly what you want? Or are you simply accepting what you believe to be inevitable? You told me you regret your choice to become a vampire, that you have regretted it every moment of every endless night. If that is true, then why are you moving forward with this ceremony? Why are you binding yourself even more deeply to the very existence that has brought you such sorrow?" Elena's face was a mask of anguish. "Because there is no other path," she cried out, her voice breaking. "I am what I am. The choice was made 500 years ago, and it cannot be unmade. This ceremony, this consecration, it is all I have left. It is the only meaning I can find in this endless existence." "No," Mara said gently, moving closer. "It is not all you have left. You have the choice right now, in this moment, to refuse, to say that you will not bind yourself more deeply to darkness, to say that even if you cannot undo what you are, you can choose to be something different moving forward." "And what would that achieve?" Elena demanded. "I would still be a vampire. I would still need blood to survive. I would still be damned. What difference does refusing this ceremony make?" "It makes all the difference," Mara said, "because redemption is not about changing what you are. It is about changing what you choose to do with what you are. You are a vampire. That may be unchangeable, but you can choose to feed without killing. You can choose to use your power to protect rather than to prey. You can choose to remember your humanity rather than to glory in its loss." She reached out, taking Elena's cold hands in her warm ones. "You can choose to love rather than to hunger." Tears of blood began to flow down Elena's cheeks. "I do not know if I remember how to love." "Then learn again," Mara said. "It is never too late to learn." The chapel had gone utterly silent. Even the most ancient and cynical of the vampires seemed transfixed by the scene unfolding before them, and Dracula stood frozen, the chalice still in his hands, his expression one of profound conflict. Elena looked at Mara, then at Dracula, then at the assembled court. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "If I refuse the consecration, if I turn away from this path, what will become of me?" "I do not know," Mara admitted. "But you will be free to discover it. You will no longer be bound by inevitability. You will have chosen your own path, and that choice, that act of will, is the first step toward redemption." Elena stood there, trembling, her entire existence balanced on the edge of a decision. Finally, she turned to Dracula. "My lord," she said, and her voice was stronger now, "I have stood beside you for 5 centuries. I have loved you after my fashion, and I have tried to be worthy of the dark gift you gave me. But Mara is right. This ceremony would bind me to darkness so completely that I could never hope to escape it, and I find that I am not ready to surrender that hope. Not yet." She removed the crown from her head and placed it on the altar. "I refuse the consecration. I will remain as I am. A vampire, yes, but one who might yet find a different path." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The vampire court erupted in rage and disbelief. Several moved to attack Elena, seeing her refusal as betrayal, but Dracula's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Enough!" His power filled the chapel, not physical force but something deeper, older, the sheer weight of his will. Every vampire froze, held in place by the command of their lord. Dracula looked at Elena, and Mara saw something in his face she had never expected to see there. Pride. "You have chosen," he said quietly. "You have exercised the will that I thought had died in you centuries ago, and I—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I honor your choice." He turned to Mara, and now his expression was complex beyond her ability to read. "You have done what you came to do," he said. "You have been the witness. You have spoken truth to darkness, and you have given Elena something I could not, the courage to choose her own path." He set down the chalice, the blood within it untouched. "The ceremony is ended. There will be no consecration tonight. Elena will not become queen of the night." He looked out at his court. "Return to your places, feed, hunt, do as you will, but know this, what happened here tonight changes nothing and everything. I am still your lord. But I will no longer pretend that damnation is the only path available to us." Slowly, the vampires began to disperse, some angry, some confused, some, to Mara's surprise, seeming almost relieved. They flowed out of the chapel like shadows retreating before dawn, until only Mara, Dracula, Elena, and Renfield remained. Renfield had been hiding in one of the alcoves throughout the ceremony, but now he emerged, his face wet with tears. "She did it," he whispered. "The mortal girl did what none of us could. She brought choice back to the damned." Elena sank to her knees, her strength seeming to leave her all at once. Mara knelt beside her, holding her as she wept, tears of blood that stained the white gown, but could not diminish its light. "What have I done?" Elena whispered. "What have I given up?" "Everything that would have destroyed you," Mara said gently, "and you have gained the possibility of becoming something more than you were." Dracula approached them slowly. He looked at Elena, then at Mara, then at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. 500 years, he said softly. 500 years I have ruled this domain, commanded these creatures, been the prince of darkness, and in 3 nights a peasant girl with nothing but faith has shown me what I had forgotten, that power means nothing without choice, that eternity is meaningless without change, that even the damned can aspire to something better than damnation. He knelt before Mara, and the gesture was so shocking that both Elena and Renfield gasped. "I cannot give you back your freedom," Dracula said. "I cannot undo what has been done or return you to your village as if none of this happened, but I can offer you a choice. Stay here, in this castle, and help us find this path you speak of. Teach us how to be more than we are. Or return to your home and know that you have planted a seed in darkness that might, just might, one day bear fruit." Mara looked at him kneeling before her, at Elena weeping beside her, at Renfield watching with desperate hope from the shadows. She thought of her grandmother, of Father Vasile, of the simple life she had known in the village below. She thought of safety and warmth, and the comfort of familiar things. And then she thought of the vampire court, of their stories of loss and loneliness, of the possibility, however small, that her presence here might help them find their way back to something approaching grace. "I will stay," she said, "not forever, but for a time. I will teach you what I can, though I am no scholar or priest. I will show you that there is another path, even if I cannot walk it for you, but you must promise me something in return." "Anything," Dracula said. "Promise me that you will try, that you will not simply go through the motions to humor me, but that you will genuinely seek a different way. Promise me that you will choose, every night, to be something other than the monster you have been." Dracula looked into her eyes, and she saw in them a spark of something that might have been his lost humanity, fighting its way to the surface. "I promise," he said, "though I do not know if I can keep that promise. I will try. For you, for Elena, for myself, I will try." He stood, helping Mara to her feet, then offering his hand to Elena as well. The 3 of them stood together in that ancient chapel, the vampire lord, his bride who had refused her crown, and the mortal girl who had dared to bring light into eternal darkness. "Come," Dracula said. "The night is young, and there is much to discuss. If we are to find this new path, we will need to understand what it looks like. And I suspect that will take more than one conversation." They climbed the stairs together, leaving the chapel of eternal night behind. The storm had passed while they were below, and when they emerged into the upper levels of the castle, the sky was clear. Through the windows, Mara could see stars, more stars than she had ever seen before, brilliant and cold and eternal. In the days and weeks that followed, Mara remained in Castle Dracula. She met with the vampire court, speaking to them of mercy and choice, of the difference between hunger and need, of how one might be a predator without being a monster. Some rejected her teachings outright, clinging to their darkness with desperate pride. But others listened. Others began slowly and haltingly to try. Elena became her closest ally. The vampire bride, freed from the expectation of becoming queen of the night, began to rediscover parts of herself she had thought long dead. She laughed again, a sound that startled everyone who heard it. She wept without shame. She even prayed, though the words were halting and uncertain, like a language half forgotten. Dracula changed most slowly, as was perhaps inevitable for one so old and so set in his ways, but he changed nonetheless. He began to question his actions, to consider consequences, to sometimes, though not always, choose mercy when cruelty would have been easier. He spent long nights talking with Mara, asking questions about faith and redemption, about the nature of God and forgiveness, about whether 500 years of evil could ever be balanced by any amount of good, and Mara answered as best she could, with honesty and compassion, never promising easy absolution but always insisting on the possibility of change. 3 months after the ceremony that never was, Dracula summoned Mara to the highest tower of the castle. She found him standing at the parapet, looking out over the valley where her village lay sleeping in the pre-dawn darkness. "It is almost sunrise," he said without turning. "I have not seen a sunrise in 5 centuries. I thought I never would again." "You still cannot," Mara said gently, moving to stand beside him. "The sun would destroy you." "I know," Dracula said, "but I find myself wishing, perhaps for the first time since my transformation, that I could see it, that I could feel its warmth on my face without burning, that I could be reminded just once more of what it meant to be alive." He turned to her, and in the faint light before dawn, she could see the change in him, subtle but real. He seemed less like a statue and more like a man. The centuries of ice in his eyes had begun just barely to thaw. "You have given me a great gift, Mara of Varkolak," he said. "You have given me the thing I thought I had lost forever, hope. I do not know where this path you have set us upon will lead. I do not know if redemption is truly possible for creatures such as us. But I know that because of you, we will try to find out." He smiled, and it was not the cold smile of a predator, but something warmer, more human, and that is more than I have had in 500 years. "It is time for me to return home," Mara said. She had known this moment was coming, had felt it approaching like the change of seasons. "I have done what I can, the rest is up to you," Dracula nodded. "I will have you escorted back to the village. You will arrive safely and you will tell them—" He paused. "Tell them that the monster in the castle is learning to be something else. It will take time, it may fail, but it is trying. I will tell them," Mara promised. She left the tower and went to say goodbye to Elena, who embraced her with a fierceness that would have broken a mortal's bones. "You saved me," Elena whispered. "Not from damnation. I think that may be beyond saving, but from despair, from the belief that nothing could ever change. Thank you, Mara. Thank you for seeing the person beneath the monster." "The person was always there," Mara replied. "You just needed someone to remind you." As the first rays of sunlight touched the mountaintops, Mara was placed on a horse, a living horse this time, not one of the demonic steeds, and led down the mountain path by Renfield. The servant, though still bound to the castle, seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from his soul. "You did an impossible thing, miss," he said as they rode. "You brought hope to the hopeless. That is a miracle, by any definition." "Or simply a reminder," Mara said, "that no one is beyond the reach of grace, not even the damned." They reached the village as the church bells rang for morning prayers. Father Vasile emerged from the church and stopped dead at the sight of Mara riding toward him, alive and whole, and wearing a simple traveling cloak over her white gown. "Child," he breathed, tears streaming down his face. "Oh, my child, we thought you lost forever." "I was never lost," Mara said, dismounting. "I was exactly where I needed to be." She turned back toward the mountain, toward the castle barely visible through the morning mist. Renfield had already gone, retreating back to the shadows before the sun could harm him. But she knew they were watching, Dracula and Elena and all the others, watching from their darkened chambers as she returned to the world of light. And she knew, with a certainty that came from faith rather than evidence, that something had changed up there in that castle of eternal night, that the darkness had been touched by light, and though it remained darkness, it was no longer quite so absolute. Father Vasile led her into the church, asking 100 questions, but Mara held up her hand. "Father," she said, "I need to pray, and then I need to rest, and then I will tell you everything. But know this, my grandmother's prayers were answered, not in the way anyone expected, but answered nonetheless. The monster she prayed for has begun to remember that he was once a man, and that is enough. For now, that is enough." She knelt before the altar, the white gown with its embroidered crosses and lilies still pristine despite everything she had endured, and she prayed, not for the salvation of the damned, though she prayed for that too, but for the courage to continue believing that redemption was possible, even in the face of overwhelming darkness. Because if a peasant girl could bring hope to a castle of vampires, if a woman with nothing but faith could make a 500-year-old monster question his damnation, then truly anything was possible. And in the mountains above, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Dracula stood in his darkened chamber and watched the light spread across the valley. He could not touch it, could not feel its warmth, but for the first time in 5 centuries, he found himself wanting to. And in that wanting, that small flicker of desire for something beyond darkness, lay the first true seed of his redemption. The story was far from over. The path would be long and filled with failures and setbacks, but it had begun, and that, in the end, was everything.